Welcome back to Project Lakute Siches. We're coming to the end of a year of this project, so congratulations to all those who have faithfully followed the program, and may Hashem help for many years to come that we continue and grow in the study of the Rebbe's Torah and in Torah in general. We will be learning a Rashi Sikha. It is the second Sikha in volume 11, the second Sikha for Parshas Vo'era. Before we get into the Rashi, let's spend a few minutes on the background of the Pasuk, the setting, the meaning of the Pasuk first, and then we'll look at the Rashi and what the Rebbe comments, and the Rebbe's comments on this Rashi. The Parsha deals with most of the 10 plagues that Hashem brought on the Egyptians for their enslaving Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, and their refusal to release them even when Moshe Rabbeinu, as an emissary of Hashem, came to Paroi and said that it was Hashem's wish that Paroi released them, he still wouldn't release them. So Hashem brought 10 makis upon him. 7 of those 10 are described in our Parsha Vo'era. The first 3 were Dom, blood, where the waters of Egypt turned to blood, Sfardeya, frogs, where the country was completely overrun with a magefa of frogs. The third was lice, where everyone, man and lavdal beast, was stricken with lice. And we're going to learn about the fourth one, oroiv, a mixture of wild animals which descended upon Egypt and destroyed and damaged. That's what's called oroiv. The root of the word oroiv is to mix, to blend, la'arev, to blend together. In this case, it was a blend of various kinds of wild animals, as we will see in the Rashi. Now, the Rashi has 2 parts, and at first glance, they seem quite distinct from each other. But first, a technical point about the verb that Hashem uses when he told Moshe Rabbeinu to warn Paroi that he will send this plague upon him. He says, Hineni mashliach b'cho. If you don't let the people go, I, said Hashem, will be mashliach. Now, mashliach sounds a lot like shaliach, which has to do with an agent, with someone or something which is sent. So at first glance, we would expect that mashliach means that Hashem will send upon the Egyptians the plague of wild animals, of oroiv. But Rashi quotes from the Pasuk the word mashliach b'cho, mashliach, whatever that means, we'll see, b'cho, on you. And Rashi explains, megara b'cho, I will provoke against you. And as support for this idea that mashliach doesn't necessarily have to do with sending, but it means provoking, Rashi quotes the pasuk from the very end of Torah, V'shen behemois ashalach bom. I will ashalach, to be explained in a moment. The teeth of behemois, of animals. What ashalach? Again, it might sound like stand, but it means loshen shisui, inciter belaz, to incite. That's the Rashi. So what mashliach? I will provoke or incite against you the wild animals. So Rashi wants to say that here the word mashliach doesn't have the usual meaning of standing, it means inciting. How does Rashi know that in fact it doesn't mean the usual term of standing? First of all, the pronunciation ought to be mishaleach, to stand, rather than mashliach. Second of all, the standing should be first the description of what is sent, and then to whom it is sent. Here, the pasuk says, "Mashliach becho es ha'oroiv." I will be mashliach against you, the oroiv. So it should have been the other way. I will stand, if it meant stand. I will stand the oroiv against you. So why is it in this order that it is the first becho against you, and then it says what it is? Because it doesn't mean to stand. It means to incite against. So when you're inciting against, you have to immediately say, incite against whom? Then you can talk about what it is that you will incite against that person or people. So because that's why Rashi actually quotes the word becho from the pasuk against you from the pasuk, even though he seems to be explaining only the word mashliach, because it is the word becho and the position where that word is written that teaches us that mashliach means to incite and not to stand. Third of all, the word lecho or becho is wrong. Becho means in you or against you. But if Hashem is standing, and that's the meaning of the word, he should be standing to you. So for all these reasons, Rashi does not want to learn that it refers to standing, but it means inciting. The third reason, again, that the word should not be becho, but lecho, so that word also proves that it doesn't mean standing but inciting, and that's again why Rashi brings the word becho in his Dibur HaMaschil, in his citation from the Pasuk. That seems to be what Rashi is out to say. And in fact, the Meforshim of Rashi, the Mizrahi, the Maharal, all learn that way. But the Rebbe, there are difficulties. Number one, Rashi cites as proof that Mashliach can mean to incite. He quotes the pasuk, as I said, from the very end of Chumash, Parshas Hazinu, second last parsha of all 5 Chumoshim. There's a much earlier citation that he could have brought from Chumash Vayikra, the end of Vayikra, where it says, "V'hishlachti vochem et chayas hasodeh." I will incite to provoke against you the beasts of the field. And since this is earlier, and since it deals with Chaya Sasoda, the wild beasts of the field, it's more appropriate for illustrating the Oroiv than the postuk which Rashi does cite, which talks about the teeth of behemoths, domestic animals. Second of all, why, after explaining that it means not to send but to provoke, and bringing a postuk to support that, why does Rashi still find it necessary to add Loshen Shisui, an expression of incitement? Is the word Shisui more familiar to the student than the word Megara, to provoke? No. Megara is found several times in Chumash. Shisui is never found in Chumash. So one doesn't explain better than the Shisui doesn't explain better than Megara. And if Rashi does find it necessary, why does he interpose his citation from Hazinu in between Loshen Megara, an expression of provoking, and Loshen Shisui, and an expression of incitement? So why did he frame on either side of the citation each one of these meanings? Why not just say Meshase? If the word Meshase, incite, is better understood than Megara, then that's the one that Rashi should have brought. So those are the Rebbe's three difficulties with Rashi. Perhaps you might add that Meshase is the greater expression of more intense incitement than Megara, and that's what Rashi wants to say. It's not just provoking, but inciting. But still, that doesn't explain why Rashi doesn't put the two expressions together, Loshen Megara, Loshen Meshase, provoking and inciting, which is the second question before. And furthermore, where did Rashi get it from? That here Hashem not only provoked, but also incited. If the word mashliach means megara, to provoke, where did Rashi get it from that there's an additional point of meshasa, inciting? Next, Rashi continues to explain this pasuk, and he quotes the next two words, Hineni mashliach b'cho es he'oroiv, the mixed multitude of animals, es he'oroiv. And the Rashi explains what's oroiv, a mixture of what? All mine chayes roes, all sorts of wild animals, unechoshim ve'akravim, and snakes and scorpions, birvuvia, all mixed together. And they would attack and destroy the Egyptians. That's one point. The Rashi continues in this same comment, something seemingly unrelated, and that is that v'yesh tam bedover ba'agoda, in the homiletical literature of Medrash, there is found a reason, b'chol maka o maka lo mazu v'lo mazu, why this maka and why that maka. What is that? That Hashem conducted himself against the Egyptians, kisteder milchomois melochim bo aleim, kisteder malchus. That Hashem, so to speak, waged battle against the Egyptians with the same tactics as earthly kings besiege and attack a city. when one army wants to besiege the city of another king, then first of all, they messed up the sources of water of the inhabitants. They won't have what to drink. And clearly this matches up with the plague of blood, where Hashem turned the Nile and the rivers and streams of Egypt into blood, and they lost their main supply of water. The next tactic is to blow instruments, trumpets, all kinds of noisemakers, shofars, horns, to frighten them and confuse the defenders. That lined up, Rashi says clearly, in the first one he doesn't say clearly that it lined up with the plague of blood. We understand it. But in the second example of noisemakers, Rashi says clearly, so too the Tzfardim, the frogs, which were the second plague, would be mekarkerim, they would croak and they would make noise, as is written in the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma, what we call Medrash Tanchuma. At the end of the Rashi. So the Rebbe, the source of Rashi is in the Medrash Rabbi, but Rashi changes from the language of the Medrash. The Medrash brings two opinions. What exactly was the Oroiv? One opinion, bears, lions, and leopards. Second opinion, hornets and mosquitoes. So those were the two opinions. Now, the fact that Rashi doesn't enumerate exactly what kind of animals they were, like the first opinion of the Medrash, is easily understood because Rashi gives it a general term that they were all sorts of wild animals, especially since the Pasuk itself doesn't force you to state that it was specifically bears and lions and leopards. So Rashi makes it generic, wild animals. Rashi doesn't bring the second example of the Medrash, which is the second opinion, which is hornets and mosquitoes, because the Medrash says that concerning the Tzfardim, it is written that after the plague ended, the Tzfardim, the frog, died. Why they died? Because of a dead frog is of no use to anyone. But in the case of the Oroiv, the mixture of wild whatever they were, it doesn't say that they died. It just says they were gone. They didn't remain. Why not? Because a dead wild animal is of benefit to people. You can use their hide and you turn it into leather, into parchment, all sorts of things. So Hashem didn't want the Egyptians to benefit from the plague, and therefore, when the plague was over, the animals, whatever the Oroiv was, disappeared. Now, that's what Rashi had already explained earlier in discussing the plague of frogs. So clearly, since the Pasuk said that Hashem removed the Oroiv must be something of which is of value to people when dead. That's not hornets or mosquitoes. So Rashi doesn't want to learn that it was hornets and mosquitoes like the second opinion of the Medrash. But when the Rashi adds After saying that it was an assortment of wild animals which came all together, Rashi adds, and snakes and scorpions. Where did he got that from? If the term oroiv, a mixture of wild animals, includes nechoshim and akrabim, snakes and scorpions, so why doesn't Rashi keep it generic, just as they did about all the other wild animals? If it's not included in the term oroiv, how does Rashi know that there were snakes and scorpions that attacked them? Second of all, when Rashi goes down to say that there is a homiletic explanation in the Medrash why each particular makkah was the way it was. And he explained that it parallels earthly kings' strategies and tactics when laying siege to a city. Why does Rashi wait with that explanation till the fourth makkah? The Medrash is explaining why blood, why frogs. So why doesn't Rashi bring the Medrash there? Now, there are Meforshim, and the Rebbe brings from the Stifstei Chachomim, which is the super commentary, a collection of commentaries on Rashi, that in fact, the reason for the first three Makos is not, according to Rashi, it's not like that Medrash. Because Rashi said earlier that when Hashem strikes a people, first, he destroys the false beliefs that they have, the false gods that they believe in. Since for Egypt, that false god was the Nile. The Nile brought sustenance to Egypt, and therefore they worshipped it. So the first plagues, blood and frogs, both of which struck the Nile, were a strike against the gods of Egypt. That's the way Rashi understands it. Blood clearly is a Makkah plague on the Nile, and the frogs also emerged from the Nile, which is the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one to take his staff and strike the Nile in order to initiate the plague of frogs. It was Aaron. And Rashi said earlier, why Aaron, not Moshe? Because Moshe was saved by the Nile. That basket that was placed in the Nile by his mother, in order to save him, he shouldn't be drowned like other Jewish children were thrown into the river and drowned. So since Moshe was saved by the Nile, it is not fitting that he should strike the Nile. So the Makkah of Sfardeya, of frogs, is also considered a plague on the Nile. So this fits in with Rashi's comment that first Hashem strikes at the false gods of a nation before striking them. That's why he had these two plagues first. And the third one, which is lice. Lice, we find an interesting thing about it, that the Khartoumim, Paro's wizards, couldn't produce the lice the way they did the other magical tricks which Moshe Rabbeinu did in Hashem's name. He turned water into blood, and he turned a staff into a snake. They copied him. They copied blood, they copied the plague of frogs in a limited way. When it came to Kinim, they said, Etzba Elekim Hu, this is a finger of God. They couldn't reproduce the miracle, and it was clear that this is from Hashem. So that too is the way of striking the false beliefs, the beliefs of the Egyptians. So we have 1, 2, 3 the first three Makos are explained according to Rashi as an attack against the false gods of Egypt. So Rashi doesn't need to explain about those three, why they came and why they were first. That's what the Sifsei Chachomim brings from the Meforshim. And that's why Rashi waits till the fourth one to bring this medrash about the tactics of Hashem paralleling the tactics of earthly kings. But, said the Rebbe, that's very difficult to understand. And he asked 4 questions. First of all, actually 5, 6. First of all, if Rashi's intention in bringing the Medrash is to explain why Hashem brought the Makev Oroiv, then how can it be that when he cites the Medrash, he stops after the reasons for the first 2 plagues, Dam and Tfadeh, blood and frogs, and he does not bring the part of the Medrash which explains why, in fact, Hashem brought the wild animals. And the Medrash says, the continuation of the Medrash that Rashi does bring is that the tactic of earthly kings is that after poisoning the water supply and after blowing all these noisemakers, and they shoot arrows which pierce the bodies of the defenders, and that parallels Kinim lies. And then about the Oroiv, the Medrash says that they send foreign mercenaries against the defenders. And that is like the Oroiv, the wild animals which Hashem sent against the Egyptians. But Rashi doesn't bring that. He brings only the explanation for blood and frogs. So if his point in bringing the Medrash is to explain why wild animals, so why doesn't he bring the part of the Medrash that explains it? On the other hand, according to what we learned before from the Sifsei Chachomim, why Rashi need not explain why Hashem sent the first 3 and why they were first, because Hashem strikes the false gods of a nation first. So Rashi seems to have changed his mind. Earlier he said that the reason why they were first is because they were Hashem's attack against the false gods of Mitzrayim. Now he said, well, the Medrash gives the reason that Hashem used the tactics of earthly kings, so he seems to be retracting. Third of all, Rashi has 2 parts, as we learned before. The one, what's the meaning of Oroiv? A mixture of wild animals, snakes, scorpions. 2, why did Hashem bring the Oroiv? And for that, Rashi cites the Medrash, that there's a reason in Medrash Tanchuma for each of the Makos. But they're totally unrelated comments, first explaining what the Oroiv was, and then explaining why Oroiv. So Rashi should have put them in 2 different sections, as he does always when he brings 2 different comments, even on the same words. But whenever he brings 2 unrelated comments, he puts them into separate sections. Third of all, why does Rashi not show the parallel between poisoning the water supplies and the plague of blood. But when it comes to frogs, there he shows the parallel. Frogs croaked like the attackers make noise in order to frighten the defenders. Fourth, Rashi says that there is the reason in the Agoda, in the homiletical literature, for why each makkah came the way it did and its position. So why stress that this is homiletical? Seems to be quite simple. Fifth of all, why does Rashi, after saying that there's a homiletical reason in the Medrash and bringing it, he then concludes, as is found in the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma, not the way of Rashi generally to cite, to quote, to point to his sources, unless it adds to an understanding of its commentary. What is added by knowing that this is from the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma? And why not say right away, there's a homiletical reason in the Medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma, that such and such is the reason for the plagues. Lastly, why does Rashi also cite from the Pasuk the word es he'oroiv? Since Rashi is only explaining the word he'oroiv, why is that es necessary? Why must he cite it? Okay, there are many questions here. All of these questions are explained by the Rebbe. There's one hinge on which all of them swing. One point. Unlike the previous three makkos, which are described, what is blood? What's going to happen with blood? The waters of Egypt will turn to blood, and you'll have problems. You won't be able to use, the Egyptians won't be able to use whatever they normally use water for, drinking, washing, bathing, etc. And so it's clear by the time the Pasuk tells us that the Nile was stricken by the staff and it all turned into blood, we know already what the plague is going to be. Likewise, in the case of the frogs, it describes the frogs will overrun Egypt. They'll be everywhere. They'll be in your kneading troughs and in your houses, in your beds. It'll be awful. And then the Pasuk describes how it actually happened. So again, by the time it happens, we know what's going to happen, what the nature of the plague is. Likewise, when it comes to lice, again, there's a description. Here, there's a warning to Paroi that unless you let the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, go, Hashem will incite against him the Oroiv, which will fill all of Egypt. It doesn't yet say what the nature of that Oroiv. Doesn't describe it. Doesn't say how it will be detrimental to Egypt. All of a sudden, there's going to be an Oroiv undefined. So we must say, says the Rebbe, that the verb which is used to describe Hashem's striking Mitzrayim with the plague, that verb itself teaches us the nature of the plague. What is that? The verb is mashliach. Mashliach means, as Rashi says, not to send, but to incite. So we understand that this is the oroiv, the mixture is a mixture of things which are incitable. They're living creatures. When animals are incited, provoked, we understand that they bite and they do damage. So it's clear by the time you get to the word ha'oroiv, it's already clear that we're talking about something alive, which will be incited and will attack. All that's left to say about the oroiv is that it is an oroiv. It is a mixture, a blend of all kinds of wild animals. That's all the Torah describes about this plague. Since Torah enumerates only this detail about the plague, that it is an oroiv, it is a mixture. Apparently, this is the only remarkable thing about the plague, is that they came all together. Now, based on that point, our questions will be answered. Once we know that the only remarkable and miraculous thing about the oroiv was the fact that all sorts of different animals came together, that implies that first of all, there were no domestic animals there. They're just chayes, beasts, because it would be quite an amazing thing if sheep would suddenly start attacking. That would be another wonder, another remarkable thing. But the Pasuk stresses that all that was remarkable about the oroiv was that the different animals came in a mixture. Not that the animals were those which never ordinarily attack the placid, the domestic sheep, goats, cows. So surely it was not domestic animals. Second of all, it's clear that it wasn't necessarily bears and lions and leopards, because that would have involved another remarkable feat of bringing all these animals, which are not necessarily found anywhere near Egypt. Hashem would have had to gather them from afar, which would be another remarkable thing. So, since Torah does not make that part of the Makkah, the only thing remarkable is that they came all together. So Rashi leaves out the description of bears, lions, leopards, and he just says chayes, roes, wild animals, any animal which is normally found around Egypt suddenly came upon them in a swarm. Third thing that's implied by this is that the animals didn't burrow into the ground. It would be very unusual to have a leopard suddenly digging into a hole in the ground. Now, the Pasuk said that when Moshe warned Paroi about the coming oroiv, he said, your homes will be filled with the oroiv. And the oroiv will also be in the land upon which they are. They will come against your people and your houses, and upon the land upon which they are. Who upon they are? Oroiv is a singular. So what will fill the land? Where the oroiv is will be filled with the oroiv. Then it should have said, Hu oleho, the land upon which the oroiv is upon. Since it says in a plural, it's apparent that we're talking about the land underneath the Egyptians and the houses of the Egyptians, the land upon which they, the Egyptians and the houses, that land, earth will be filled with the Oroi. Where do you have wild animals burrowing in? And if they did, that would be another remarkable thing about the Oroi, which is not mentioned. So based on that, again, we must say that the meaning of that the Oroi will fill the ground, the land upon which the Egyptians stand and the houses stand, must be talking about certain kind of creatures which normally burrow in the earth and they attack. But that, snakes and scorpions, and that's why Rashi adds those in order to explain the term Ha'adoma Sherhei Moleh, the land, the earth upon which they stand. Now, there's still explanation needed, said the Rebbe. What's so great about the fact that all the animals came together in a swarm? That's the only thing that the Pasuk stresses, that it was a swarm of animals. To explain that, Rashi brings the Medrash. There is the Medrash which teaches us about the Makis, that they follow the pattern of an earthly army attacking. And Rashi only brings up to the second one. Why? Because mainly Rashi wants to explain the Makkah of Oroiv based on the Medrash which talks about the Tzfardei, the frogs. What is that? It is the tactic of an attacking army to frighten the inhabitants, to do all kinds of things. In the case of the frogs, it was their croaking and the noise. But in the case of the Oroiv, what frightened them was this amazing swarm of animals coming all together, whatever they were. Wild animals from all directions of all kinds. Nobody ever saw such a thing. That's frightening. That adds to the fright of the Makkah. And that was the point of Rashi's bringing this Medrash. Not that Rashi wanted to teach us why did Hashem bring an Oroiv, then Rashi wouldn't have waited till the fourth one. In fact, Rashi doesn't hold like the Medrash that the first three Makkahs were for the reasons like the Medrash says, to poison their water supply and to frighten them with the croaking and to like shoot arrows into their bodies. No, Rashi maintains, like he said earlier, that the first three were to strike against the gods of Egypt. So why does he bring this Medrash? Only to point out what's so important about this swarm of animals is the fright effect, the confusion, that they're all coming together, and that confuses the enemy. And that leads to another discussion, which we'll have to only address briefly because of time constraints. The first three Makos have no mention about what happened to Bnei Yisrael at the time when these Makos struck Egypt. In the fourth Makkah of Oroiv, suddenly it says that Hashem says, I will set apart Bnei Yisrael in the land of Goshen, And there will be no oroiv, no attack of wild animals. Why didn't Hashem say so in the case of the blood and the frogs and the lice, that he will set aside the Bnei Yisrael and they will not suffer the Makeh? So there's a major argument between Rishonim whether in fact the plagues of blood, frogs, lice struck Bnei Yisrael too or not. Ibn Ezra says that in fact, if you follow the line of the Pasuk, that only in the fourth plague does Hashem say, I will set aside the Bnei Yisrael from the Egyptians, and they will not experience the plague of Oroiv. So that implies that the first three were in fact upon Bnei Yisrael too. Many others argue against the Ibn Ezra, particularly the Radbaz, Reb David ben Zimra, the Rebbe quotes, addresses the Ibn Ezra directly and says what the Ibn Ezra says is unthinkable, especially since it is implied in the Pasuk that is wrong. It didn't strike they didn't strike Bnei Yisrael, because it says that the Egyptians couldn't drink from the Nile when it turned into blood. The Egyptians dug around the Nile to find water, which implies that they didn't have to dig around. They had water. They could drink from the waters of the Nile, which did not turn into blood for them. And likewise, in the case of frogs, it says that when Hashem said he will remove the frogs, the frogs will stop, they'll go away from you, is addressing Paroi, and from your houses and from your servants and your people. Again, that implies that the frogs were not a problem for Bnei Yisrael. There's a middle of the road opinion of the Rambam, which we'll leave, but at any rate, what does Rashi hold about that? Since Rashi doesn't explain any answer to the question of why only in the fourth Makeh does it say that Hashem will set aside Bnei Yisrael from the Egyptians, so apparently Rashi also agrees that the first three Makehs were attacked Bnei Yisrael too. But, however, we'll answer these questions that we learned before that the Radbaz brings against the Ibn Ezra. He proves from the implications of the Psukim. However, we'll answer them. There's one final question that the Radbaz says, I don't understand. If the Makehs struck Bnei Yisrael too, so what kind of sign would that be for Paroi that he must let Bnei Yisrael go? They too were stricken. That's a difficult question. How would Rashi answer that? Says the Rebbe, that is answered by Rashi's previous comment about the first three plagues. The first three plagues were a strike against the Egyptians' god, the Nile, which whatever they believed in. It wouldn't help them if Bnei Yisrael were also stricken by that plague. They also suffered from a lack of water or from frogs, because the main point is that the god of Egypt had been stricken. And that was stricken either way, whether it was the Egyptians who suffered or the Bnei Yisrael suffered. It doesn't change. Only when it comes to Oroiv, which now the point is to strike the Egyptians themselves. Then there it's important that the Bnei Yisrael was set apart from the Egyptians and they didn't experience the Makkah. On a deeper level, the Rebbe explains, Oroiv means a mixture. Normal barriers disappear. Animals which don't keep each other company in nature suddenly accompany each other. So one might think that there are other barriers, other separations which are found in the world also would disappear. Maybe the idea of Orev means that everything blends with everything. Whatever is normally separate from other things is suddenly blended together. Like what? Like Bnei Yisrael and other nations. We say Hamavdil, Hashem separated us, Ben Yisrael or Amim, between Yisrael and other nations. So when there is an Oroiv, one might think that in that case, there's also a blend of Bnei Yisrael and Egyptians. Chat v'sholom, therefore Hashem said, I'm going to make a sign, a produce, that Bnei Yisrael will not be stricken. They are still separate from the Egyptians. I have to point out practically that nowadays, when there's more of a danger of an intermingling between Bnei Yisrael and other nations, of assimilation far more than in previous generations, how much more so we have to strengthen that barrier, that havdolah, that separation, Ben Yisrael or Amim, and we are assured, said the Rebbe, that if we strengthen that separation, there will be no separation between us and Hashem Yisborach, and he will bring us, each and every one of us, to a proper tshuva, and we will be redeemed with Mashiach's tzidkenu.